Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are going to start up again with our next talk with Cameron Deardorff, and it looks like he's got a special friend.
Hi there. Hello. Hi, everybody. This is Nali here. She's going to help me out today. But I'm really excited to bring you this talk at my first ever 360 iDev. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the Slack channel. I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks so much. Let's go ahead and start the video.
Hi, my name is Cameron Deardorff. I'm an iOS developer, and today I'm going to talk to you about dog fooding delight. So recently, I've been making a hiking app, and my users have been asking for a way to record their hikes. So I designed and I built this feature, but before sending it out, I wanted to see it in action. Rather than putting this in my code, I really wanted to simulate the location via the environment. And I was really excited to see that Xcode already provided this. All I had to do is give Xcode a GPX file, which is something I work in pretty commonly. GPX files are an easy way to describe a path using GPS locations. Xcode really wanted the GPX file to include waypoints, whereas I usually use routes and tracks because they describe where you're going and where you've been. Meanwhile, waypoints really describe points of interest, and so it was strange seeing that. Nonetheless, I decided that I'll just make scripts. I'll make things to convert this for me, and it was no problem. But then I ran into the management of those files, because I had the route and track version, and I had waypoint version, and I didn't know which one Xcode really had. So after using this for a while, I really concluded that it wasn't ideal. Not just because of having to manage files manually, but because Xcode didn't really provide anything in the way of play and pause controls, or even speed adjustment. So I still wanted to ship, but I didn't have what I really needed to do that. But anyway, I powered through and I used what I had. So we have this idea in software development of this pure process, where we go from idea, we build that idea, test it, ship it, and iterate, and make an awesome product along the way. But really, it's idealistic, and it doesn't really exist, that process, because things always get in the way. We encounter these paper cuts and sharp edges, really just distractions from this pure process. Most are avoidable or even fixable, but not by themselves painful enough to fix. But if you stack enough of them on top of each other, it gets really bad, really painful. In my case, I was working with inadequate testing tools, but you might be working with, I don't know, long wait times for builds or dependency installation. If you're working with other developers, you might be swapping around environment variable files, and when those get out of sync, it can be really annoying. You might be messing with an esoteric building system, or trying to free up disk space on your machine. Right now we're in Xcode beta season, so every 2 weeks you have a new version to download, extract, and install. These are all little examples of things that just get in the way. They're little paper cuts, annoyances. So I had this realization that developers, we spend most of our time building things for others. We want to deliver these delightful experiences, and we want to give our users ways to work faster and live better lives. But in doing so, we encounter a lot of paper cuts, a lot of sharp edges, and our experience delivering these apps is not so delightful. So why is it that we continue like this? Why don't we make these go away? Well, first, we have this laser focus on shipping. To stay competitive in the App Store, you constantly have to be improving your app. Also, you might have a backlog full of features and bugs that you need to get out the door. You need to implement and you need to fix. Also, it feels like we might be squandering our impact when we build things just for ourselves. Developers have this incredible ability to build things for people all across the planet, solve problems for people at scale. And these can be really small problems, just like sorting a list, or really big things like actual literal rocket science. And so it might seem a little bit selfish just to build things for ourselves when we could be doing so much more. In my case, I was working with an existing tool, and it did all right. It got most of what I wanted. But the problem here is that when you rely on something that's just not good enough, you're really trading one problem for another, but with more steps. So I want to take a quick tangent and talk about delight. It's certainly become a loaded and overused term in the tech industry. In our day-to-day usage, we're usually describing somebody's personality, their sense of humor. We're describing a meal, or even a piece of art. And so when we talk about apps as being delightful, it's a little bit different. Usually when users come to our apps, they're using them for their utility. They want to get work done, and they want to make their life better. So when we're talking about delightful apps, great apps, we're really talking about simple, streamlined, and contextual experiences. Users want to encounter as few barriers as possible in doing their work. They want to get in, do the task, and get out, and go on to the next thing. Users want to be met where they're at. It's expected that your app knows how the work was done beforehand, the inputs and the outputs, and it's able to slot into that place in their workflow perfectly. So along with delight, dogfooding is also a pretty commonly used word in tech. And really all it means is that you consume what you produce. So you make what you use. And it makes sense. I mean, if you were to make a camera app, it would make sense that you use it because you probably have added enhanced features. And the benefits of dogfooding are pretty obvious. One, you have fewer bugs go out to users because you're probably using it more in development. You also get to understand your users better when you're using your own products because you're experiencing what they experience. And when there is an issue, you share in their annoyance and you suffer with them, and you'll be more motivated to solve the problems. So dogfooding delight is really just a way to say we should be making our workflow better because we want to make great things for our users. But to make great things, our workflow has to be great, right? So how is it that we can create great things when our experience doing so is not so great? And this really reminds me of the instructions you might see when you're on a plane. When the oxygen masks come down, how are you supposed to help others? You first have to be in a place to do so. As developers, when we ignore our own pain to help others, it's a noble, but in our case, probably needless pain. We can remove that pain. We have the ability. We can fix things. That's no problem. So how is it that we can make our workflow better? How can we make it simpler? How can we make it more streamlined and contextual? One way to do so is by shortening feedback cycles. This is something that machine learning practitioners have gotten really well at. Instead of using their entire dataset when training a model and iterating, they'll use just a subset so that they can train faster, make changes, and see improvements. This is also a reason why SwiftUI really seems like a breath of fresh air right now. You can make your change and see how it affected your app, your simple component even, much quicker. Because if you used AppKit and UIKit in the past, you understand the feedback cycle is really long. From the time you make the change in your app, build and run, launch the simulator, and finally navigate in your app to the right part where you made your change. And a lot of context can be lost when you have longer feedback cycles. One of the obvious ways that you can shorten your feedback cycle is by making your app build faster. Another way to improve your workflow is to remove manual steps. For example, if you're shuffling files around frequently or having to take tons of screenshots for the App Store, finding ways to remove those manual steps and automate them will certainly make your workflow better. Also, eliminating any side quests that you may encounter. And this is anything that's required to do a piece of work, but it's not necessarily the piece of work itself. So for example, having to prepare test data or frequently having to dump user defaults so that you can see changes and effects in your app Those are examples of side quests that, if you can remove them, your development workflow will be better. Now, to make your workflow better, this often does require building tools. And when building tools for yourself, it's a great time for a lot of things, especially experimentation. If there are new APIs out there, it's a great time to play with them. For example, maybe you haven't jumped into SwiftUI because it's so young. This is a great time to do so because the benefits are so high and their risk is so low. Also, it's a great time to experiment with things you might be unfamiliar with. Maybe you've never made a command line utility, and maybe you've never played with serverless apps before. Building things for yourself is also a great time to practice. Depending on how many people you work with, whether it's just you or many people, you might have one or just a few hats, or many hats that you wear. So building things for yourself is a great time to practice and step into new roles. For example, maybe you want to try being a product designer for just your own tool. This usually starts by taking a step back and observing, trying to understand the problem, its symptoms, and how it occurs, and then what best way to serve those issues and make your workflow better. From there, you come up with a minimal feature set and an ideal feature set. You work your way through there as a developer and then come to a place where you've made something that makes your workflow better. Building things for yourself is also a great time to hack. So when sending things to the App Store, you don't want to play rejection tag. And so using private APIs, it's just not encouraged. But when you're building things for yourself, you don't have to send it to the App Store. You can keep it just to yourself. And so you can use all the private APIs that you want, especially if they make your workflow faster. Let me show you what I built to make my testing for the hiking app easier. If you recall, I wanted to see this new tracking feature in action. While using Xcode's built-in functionality, I found that I was having to manage GPX files a lot. Also, Xcode didn't provide any way to modify the speed at which the simulation would go, or any sort of playback controls. So whatever I built had to be able to simulate a path. It had to manage my files and do whatever transforms necessary. And finally, it had to provide the controls that I needed for speed and play and pause. Ideally, this tool would show some real-time progress of the simulation. It would be able to interpolate points between distant coordinates to make the simulation much smoother. Provide speed, elevation, and heading data to the simulator, something that's lacking from Xcode. And finally, it'd be able to show some metadata about the path. For instance, the distance that it covers and the elevation profile. So the tool I made over here does most of the things that I have here. It simulates the path, as I'll show. It will manage all my files and provide the controls I need. So I have a few files over here describing some different paths up mountains. And I don't have to worry about what's in these files, the contents. It manages that for me. You can have waypoints, routes, or tracks. And to me, in this app, it's all the same. So after I've added the file, I can go ahead and start playing it. The simulation will go ahead as planned, and I can adjust the speed. So over in my hiking app, I'll start a little recording. And over here, I'll start simulating. And we see as the app goes along the path, it sends over the location to the simulator. And I don't have any code in my app to make this happen. This is all being done by the environment. And if I modify the speed here, we can see we slow down quite a bit. And we can speed it back up to see things happen a lot faster. So you might be curious how this all works. So the first thing I did was just approach it the same way that Xcode does. It already communicates with the simulator and says what your current location is. So I decided that I'd disassemble Xcode and sift through all the different symbols to find something that was meaningful. And after doing that, I found that Xcode did communicate with the simulator via the distributed notification center. All you had to do was provide a latitude, a longitude, and a simulator ID. And like I said before, building your own tools to make your workflow better is a great time for a lot of things, primarily experimenting with new things. So this app I made is built with SwiftUI. It's also a Mac app, two things that I've never messed with before. But in making my workflow better with it, I've learned quite a bit about making apps for the Mac and also SwiftUI. I said that making tools for yourself is a great time to work on different skills in different roles. And it's also a great time to hack. For example, I'd never worked with disassembling Xcode and looking for symbols in there. And while I certainly don't understand all of how Xcode works, I learned a lot in the process. So the big question here is, how does that affect your users? If your workflow is better, will they notice? How could they tell? So when your workflow is better, and you love what you do, and you love how you do it, your users will receive fixes and features much faster. When your feedback cycles are shorter, and you have fewer manual steps to do, you can spend that time better by making things for your users that are meaningful, instead of spending time on side quests. Also, you can produce higher quality apps. Just think right now, there's a cognitive load that you have to hold just thinking about memory leaks, unlocalized resources, or inaccessible user interfaces. When you make tools to detect those, and you don't have to think about them anymore, you can spend that cognitive load elsewhere, focusing on new features that you're ready to move on. And finally, I have here sustainability, but it's more on the developer side. So, of course we love what we do. We make great apps. But when you love how you do it, then burnout becomes less of an issue. And so users will continue to receive updates and fixes, and the developer, you, will be far more engaged. To wrap up, dog food and delight is just a way to say that we should be experiencing the same joy, satisfaction, and delight that we deliver to our users. There are no bonus points, bragging rights, or value in suffering through the pain points in your development workflow. Finally, I wanted to leave you with a simple and short tagline, but couldn't really make up my mind. So hopefully one of these resonates with you. Thanks for watching.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Cameron. We'll take a 10-minute break again, and we'll see you in 10.